Hello, Namaskar. This is Firstpost and you're watching Vantage with me, Palki Sharma. Could Justin Trudeau be on his way out? Several lawmakers from his own party are trying to oust him. They feel that he is a liability amid falling poll numbers. And what a time to face a revolt, right after he picked a diplomatic fight with India. But do the rebels have the numbers to topple him? And how did Trudeau go from being an activist darling to a political liability? We'll discuss all of that. In India, a subtle message to China amid the border reset. The finance minister says foreign investment must respect national interest. In Russia, Putin's post-BRICS appeal to the world. He says it's time to ditch the US dollar. But is the world ready for it? In West Asia, Al Jazeera is under the spotlight again. Israel says their journalists worked for Hamas. In Turkey, a terror attack on its defense industry. In Europe, a reality check for the champions of secularism. A new report claims Islamophobia is rampant. In America, the campaign is descending to new lows. Donald Trump and Kamala Harris are getting personal now. And in Ukraine, North Korean troops have triggered a new front. The United States says 3,000 of them are fighting for Russia. All this and more coming up. The headlines first. 2 people arrested in Sri Lanka after reportedly planning a terror attack on Israelis. The arrests came after India provided intelligence on the possible threat. One of the suspects had arrived in the country from Iraq. Yesterday, the US and the UK had warned its citizens from travelling to Arugam Bay, which is a popular tourist destination in Sri Lanka. Clashes erupt between Hezbollah and Israeli troops in a Lebanon border village. On Wednesday, the Iranian-backed group claimed that it had killed more than 70 Israeli soldiers. Israel says that they have hit Hezbollah's weapons production facilities in Beirut. The clashes in the last few days have been some of the fiercest since the latest conflict began. German Chancellor Olaf Scholz heads to India for a 3-day visit. He will meet Prime Minister Narendra Modi on Friday and chair a joint cabinet meeting. Germany is looking to bolster trade ties with India amid deteriorating relations with China. The wife of former Pakistani Prime Minister Imran Khan released from prison. Bushra Bibi secured bail in a case linked to the illegal sale of state gifts. She was arrested in January in the run-up to the February election. No such relief for Imran Khan, who remains in jail. And Reliance Industries chairman Mukesh Ambani says India will lead the AI age, calls it a rapidly emerging innovation hub. The remarks came at the launch of NVIDIA's Hindi language AI model. It's part of the chip giant's efforts to tap into India's growing demand for AI technologies.
I didn't make history tonight. You did.
You are so yesterday. Justin Trudeau has completely replaced you.
Justin Trudeau is facing a mutiny. His ship is sinking, rival sailors are closing in, but the captain appears clueless, which is why the crew is taking matters into their own hands. They want a new captain, or in this case, a new Prime Minister. As you know, Trudeau leads the Liberal Party in Canada. On Wednesday, their lawmakers met in Ottawa. No cameras, though. This was a closed-door meeting. Around 20 MPs voiced their opposition to Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. They asked him to resign before the next election. 24 of them also signed a letter, or rather an ultimatum. Resign by October 28th or face a revolt. Now, to put that in context, the Liberal Party has 153 MPs in Parliament. 24 of them are rebelling. Trudeau himself addressed his lawmakers at this meeting. He said that he would reflect on what was said. But he did not say that he would resign. Now, this mutiny raises 2 questions. One, why now? And two, what happens next? Now, the first answer is simple. Because Trudeau has run Canada into the ground. Cost of living is high, the immigration system is broken, and jobs are running out. Canada's unemployment was 6.6% in August. That's a 7-year high if you exclude the pandemic years. So naturally, the people want him out. Just look at the opinion polls. Trudeau's party is at 23%. That's the kind of support they have, 23%. And look at the opposition. The Conservative Party, led by Pierre Poilievre, they are polling at 42.5%. That's nearly a 20-point lead. If elections are held today in Canada, Justin Trudeau would lose, quite badly at that. And it's not like he can blame someone else for this, because Trudeau has been Prime Minister since 2015. That's 9 years of leadership. So in simple words, he is a liability. He's too toxic to lead an election campaign. Even his allies know that. After 2021, Trudeau's government was propped up by Jagmeet Singh, the Khalistani leader of the NDP, the New Democratic Party, NDP. But last month, Jagmeet dumped Trudeau. He said he would fight the election alone. Do you know why? Because Trudeau is a liability. And now even his own party leaders realize that. In yesterday's meeting, one of them used the example of the United States. The Democrats swapped out Joe Biden for Kamala Harris, and that swap did give them a boost. So the rebels say, let's do the same in Canada. Swap out Trudeau to infuse some energy. Which brings us to the second question. What happens next? Well, the decision is entirely up to Trudeau. The Liberal Party does not have a provision to remove its leader, not unless they lose a general election. If they lose, there is a confidence vote, and after that vote, a new leadership contest. So legally, the ball is very much in Trudeau's court. His ministers are backing him, so are a majority of his lawmakers, not because he's doing well, but because there's no other option. A leadership race could take months to complete, by which time the Conservatives will be too far ahead. So chances are Trudeau will ride it out. The elections are due in October next year, but they could happen earlier if Trudeau loses a trust vote. Either way, one thing is clear. The Prime Minister's political star is dying, if it is not dead already. Justin Trudeau inherited a broken Liberal Party in the last decade. In the 2011 election, they came in third. This party, they came third. They got just 34 seats out of 308. After that, after this drubbing, the leadership came to Trudeau. And he can thank his father for that. Trudeau's father was Pierre Trudeau. He was one of Canada's longest-serving prime ministers. So Justin Trudeau is basically political royalty. He rebuilt the party in his own image. Very cosmopolitan, very progressive, and very activist. In the 2015 election, the plan worked. The Liberals stormed back to power with 184 seats. One of their best ever performances. This was in 2015. Trudeau's first few weeks in power gave the world a glimpse into his politics. For example, his cabinet, 15 women and 15 men, most of them under the age of 50. He cut taxes for the middle class. He raised taxes for the richest Canadians. He also talked about building bridges with Indigenous Canadians, about protecting forests and green energy. He was basically an activist darling. And maybe the intentions were good, but activism does not pay grocery bills. And then came the pandemic, a huge jolt to Trudeau's government. He locked down businesses and cities. He made vaccines mandatory for government employees. Again, intentions were good, but the implementation was problematic. When Canadians protested the vaccine mandates, he cracked down. And this has been a feature of Trudeau's leadership, a sort of savior complex. The idea that he alone has the answers. Now, we saw that even in foreign policy, like the comments that he made on India's farmers' protest, or the ongoing Khalistan issue. Canadians tolerated that attitude as long as the economy was good, but that's not the case anymore. Trudeau also faces more charismatic challengers like Pierre Poilievre, more confrontational, more populist, and more willing to tap into controversial issues like culture wars or climate change. For the Liberal Party, this is a significant crisis because Justin Trudeau was the party. If he's popular, they win. If he's not, they lose. And that is the problem of building a movement around one person. I guess Trudeau's career is a lesson for all politicians. Symbolism gets you elected. Policies keep you there.
I cannot blindly receive FDI.
The India-China relationship is back in the spotlight thanks to the border agreement. Just 24 hours ago, Prime Minister Modi met President Xi Jinping of China. It was their first bilateral meeting in 5 years. So there's a lot of curiosity on what happens next. Well, India is not eager for a complete reset in ties, it seems. India's finance minister has made that clear today. Nirmala Sitharaman says that she will not accept FDI deals blindly.
I cannot blindly receive FDI because I want money for investment, forgetful or unmindful of where it is coming from.
FDI is foreign direct investment, and India's FDI rules remain unchanged. Especially for Chinese companies, they'll still have to go through the same level of scrutiny as before. Of course, Sitharaman did not name China, but when you go through her statement, it becomes quite obvious. She was delivering a message to Chinese investors. In fact, I have a quote with me. We want business, we want investment, but we also need some safeguards because India is located in a neighborhood that is very, very sensitive. Now, why does India need these safeguards? To protect its national interest. Sitharaman stressed this repeatedly. And what does this mean for investors? Well, every investment proposal from India's neighbors will be carefully scrutinized. The finance minister says it is not just about who the investors are, it's also about where the money is coming from. Indian authorities will scrutinize all proposals. So if you're running a business in India, if you line up an investor from the neighborhood, you cannot simply take a check from them. You will need a clearance from the government of India first. That is the rule, and that is not changing anytime soon. Now, since July, there's been a lot of buzz around this subject. India has set an ambitious target this year. New Delhi is aiming for $100 billion in foreign direct investment. But where will this money come from? India could tap China as a potential source. That's the suggestion of V. Anant Nageswaran. He is India's chief economic advisor. In July, he recommended opening doors to Chinese money. Nageswaran believes that this would benefit India in two ways. One, Chinese FDI could help in boosting exports. And two, it could reduce India's trade deficit with China. Remember, despite the border tensions, China remains India's top trading partner. In 2023, India imported over $120 billion worth of goods from China. But when it comes to FDI, China is still lagging behind. Do you know what's the share of Chinese FDI in India? It is less than 1%, 0.37% to be precise. On the list of countries investing in India, China ranks at number 22. If this changes, if more Chinese investment comes into India, it could bridge the trade gap. More investment could also lead to fewer Chinese imports. So the idea makes economic sense. But you see, economy is just one of the factors in this relationship. There's a strategic dimension too, which is why India is not lifting all barriers. Even with respect to investments, there are security concerns. We are all aware of the predatory nature of Chinese investments. China uses investments to advance its national interest. It uses money as a tool to expand the influence of the Communist Party. Last month, S. Jaishankar spoke about this, India's External Affairs Minister. He said Chinese investments must be scrutinized. He also warned about the risk of Chinese investments in critical sectors like pharmaceuticals, telecom, and technology. And this is sound advice. The world's leading economies are using the same approach. Many of them have banned Chinese companies like Huawei from their telecom networks. The US has placed several curbs on investments as well. 3 industries in America cannot do business with China: advanced computing chips, quantum technology, and artificial intelligence. In the past, India too has banned hundreds of Chinese apps. It also quietly phased out Chinese equipment from critical networks. And there is no reason to reverse this policy. No economic argument is strong enough to justify it. Granting full freedom to Chinese investors would mean compromising on India's national security. This week, Russian President Vladimir Putin scored a big win. Despite Western efforts to isolate him, he just wrapped up a BRICS summit. Russia hosted leaders from 36 countries in the city of Kazan, and Putin took this opportunity to make an appeal. He asked BRICS nations to ditch the Western banking order.
The dollar was used as a weapon, it is true, and we see that. I think it is a great mistake by those who do it.
Putin says the West weaponizes the dollar, and he has a point. But what's the solution? Well, he says the BRICS should have their own payment system, an alternative to the Western system, which is called SWIFT. And what is SWIFT? Imagine you're a banker, a customer comes to you, they want to send money abroad, and they give you all the details like how much money needs to be transferred, the bank details of the recipients, and so on. So you have those details. Now it is your job to make sure that the money ends up in the right place. How do you do that? You see, for international transfers, banks have a special messaging system. Think of it as a secure WhatsApp for banks, or their version of it. This system is called SWIFT. So as a bank, when you transfer money for your customer, you open the SWIFT system. There you send a message to the recipient's bank. This message tells them how much money is being sent and where it needs to go. Now, while SWIFT does not move the money itself, it makes sure that the money ends up in the right place. SWIFT stands for Society for Worldwide Interbank Financial Telecommunication, SWIFT. SWIFT is what enables international banking. So the system plays a vital role. Without it, you cannot participate in international banking. More than 11,000 banks and financial institutions use the SWIFT system. They are based in more than 200 countries and territories. Now, SWIFT is technically a neutral organization. It is based in Belgium, but the West wields significant influence over SWIFT. The system itself was created by a consortium of US and European banks in 1973. So if Western nations want, they can push a country out of SWIFT, and that's exactly what they did to Russia. When Russia invaded Ukraine in 2022, Western nations sanctioned 7 Russian banks. They were removed from the SWIFT system. Effectively, these banks were cut off from global trade and international markets. They could not finance international projects. They could not make or receive payments from their customers outside. So you can imagine why Putin is upset with the Western system and why he's pushing BRICS to come up with an alternative. Another villain in the story is the US dollar. It dominates the global banking system. So Putin is talking about de-dollarization. In fact, BRICS has been discussing this for a while. In the last summit too, de-dollarization came up. South Africa was the host then. BRICS leaders agreed to keep talking, but they haven't been able to come up with any alternatives yet. Individually, BRICS members have their own arrangements. They trade in their native currencies, mostly through bilateral arrangements. And the group may want to de-dollarize, but central banks across the world are not ready for this. They still depend on the greenback. Most foreign exchange reserves are still held in the US dollar. The share of the US dollar in forex reserves internationally stands at 59%. So how can the BRICS break the dollar's hegemony? Can India help in building an alternative system? At the Kazan summit, Prime Minister Modi made a pitch for India's UPI.
ब्रिक्स देशों के बीच फाइनेंशियल इंटीग्रेशन बढ़ाने के लिए प्रयासों का हम स्वागत करते हैं। लोकल करेंसीज में व्यापार और सुगम रूप से क्रॉस बॉर्डर पेमेंट से हमारा आर्थिक सहयोग सुदृढ़ होगा। भारत द्वारा बनाया गया यूनिफाइड पेमेंट्स इंटरफेस यानी यूपीआई भारत की एक बहुत बड़ी सक्सेस स्टोरी है। इसे कई देशों में अपनाया गया है।
Prime Minister Modi was referring to the UAE, the newly minted member of BRICS. This year, UPI was introduced in Dubai. UPI stands for Unified Payment System. It is the backbone of digital payments in India. So far, the UPI has been rolled out in 7 countries, and this list is expected to grow in the coming months. Over 30 countries have shown interest in adopting this Indian system. So should the BRICS consider using it too? Well, the idea is appealing, but not without its own set of challenges. Like, how would a single platform handle multiple currencies? How do you settle transactions in real time without the risk of currency devaluation? More importantly, how do you build consensus among member countries to adopt the UPI? Would India, for instance, be willing to share the UPI with members like China? a neighbor that keeps challenging India's sovereignty. Clearly, a lot of work needs to be done on all these fronts. Having said that, the BRICS must keep exploring all alternatives. You see, the global order cannot be changed in one day, but it can certainly be challenged, one initiative at a time. Now let's shift our focus to West Asia, to the war in Gaza. Israel has set its sights on an old foe. It is going after Al Jazeera once again. Al Jazeera is a news network based in Qatar. It is the only international news platform with journalists on the ground in Gaza. And Israel has always been at loggerheads with this group. And that's putting it mildly. Israel says that Al Jazeera employees in Gaza work for Hamas. Yesterday, the Israeli military put out this post. They named 6 Al Jazeera journalists and accused them of being members of terrorist groups in Gaza, both Hamas and the Palestinian Islamic Jihad, or PIJ. Israel says that Al Jazeera journalists are members of these groups, and they say that they have proof that they have found, and I'm quoting, numerous documents like personnel files, list of terrorist training courses, phone directories, and even salary slips. Israel claims that these documents prove that the 6 Al Jazeera journalists are also terrorists. And what does Al Jazeera have to say about this? Well, they have, and I'm quoting again, vehemently condemned the accusations. Al Jazeera says that the Israeli charges are unfounded, baseless, and a pretext for further violence against its staff. And that last part is a counter-accusation. Al Jazeera says that Israel is setting the stage to kill more of its journalists in Gaza. Israeli strikes have already killed 4 Al Jazeera journalists in the Gaza Strip over the last 1 year. Israel had also called some of them terrorists, but the evidence produced was sketchy. Take, for example, the case of Ismail al-Ghul. He was killed in an airstrike on the 31st of July. His camera person, Rami al-Rifi, also died in the same attack. After the strike, Israel said that al-Ghul was a Hamas member. They did not focus on al-Rifi. He was collateral damage. But Israel said that it was justified in killing al-Ghul. And that, and I'm quoting again, that he was an engineer in Hamas's elite Nakba brigade. He apparently got the job in 2014. The documents also say that he had received a military rank in the year 2007. But here's the problem with this. Al-Ghul was born in 1997. So the Israel documents say that he had a military rank at the age of 10 and that he was an engineer for an elite unit at the age of 16 or 17. Now, either Gaza has the world's best engineering colleges or the Israeli documents need to be scrutinized further. Either way, Israel called al-Ghul a member of Hamas and then escalated their fight with Al Jazeera. You may remember these visuals. These are from September 22nd, when Israeli forces raided Al Jazeera's offices in Ramallah. It's a city in the West Bank. It was Al Jazeera's headquarters for Israel and the Palestinian territories. The IDF raided the office and forced them to shut down for 45 days. So Israel has a history of targeting Al Jazeera. As far as they're concerned, this is a propaganda outlet. And that part is not wrong. Al Jazeera is an arm of the government of Qatar. It was founded in 1996 to boost the Gulf nation's international profile. The network toes the Qatari line, so its coverage is biased, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it recruits terrorists. Israel has every right to question their biased coverage, but not to call them terrorists on flimsy grounds and then bomb them to oblivion, which is extreme. Not to mention a dangerous trend in a world where the first set of people cornered government's target are journalists. Now to Turkey, where a terror attack has targeted its key defense industry. The attack took place close to Ankara. The target was the state-run Turkish aerospace industries. Armed attackers infiltrated the building and opened fire on employees. 5 people were killed. Turkey has called this a heinous terror attack. No group has claimed responsibility yet, but Ankara believes that it was an old enemy, the Kurdistan Workers' Party or the PKK. Today, Turkey even launched airstrikes on Kurdish targets in Iraq and Syria in retaliation. Our next report brings you all the details.
It was around 4 p.m. local time. Explosions were heard outside the headquarters of TUSAS, that's the Turkish Aerospace Industries. Local media showed plumes of smoke. There were reports of a large fire. Some witnesses even heard gunshots. Soon, emergency services rushed to the site. The TUSAS headquarters is located in Kahramanmaraş. That's an area north of Ankara, around 25 kilometers from Turkey's capital. Security footage showed 3 people. They arrived in a cab to one of the main entrances. Once they reached, they killed the cab driver first. Then they used his vehicle to carry out the attack. Witnesses believe that the attackers were familiar with the layout of the building. They entered it and started firing shots. The attack happened during the time of a shift change. Many employees were leaving, and they found themselves in the middle of the attack. 4 people were killed in the shooting, and 5 overall, including the cab driver. At least 22 others were injured, including Special Operation Forces. The staff were taken to shelters and kept there for several hours. The attackers were in plain clothes. They wore backpacks and had an assault rifle. One of them was a woman. 2 have been killed by the security forces. No group has claimed responsibility yet for this. President Recep Tayyip Erdogan wasn't in Turkey when the attack happened. He was in Russia's Kazan for the BRICS summit. Countries there expressed their condolences. Erdogan called it a heinous terrorist attack. Ankara is now blaming the Kurdistan Workers' Party or the PKK for the attack.
When compared to previous similar attacks, we have a strong opinion that it is the PKK, Kurdistan Workers' Party, terrorist organization. But as I said, it will become certain once the identities of the attackers are determined, which we will announce with you to the public, our saintly people.
The PKK was founded in the late 1970s. Its mission is to create a separate country called Kurdistan. Some context now. The Kurds are an ethnic group in West Asia, like Arabs and Persians, but the Kurds don't have a country. They're spread across multiple states like Syria, Iraq, Turkey, and Iran. In the late 70s, Kurds in Turkey began to agitate. They demanded a separate country. Ankara rejected these demands, so they became more radical. They found a safe haven in northern Iraq, and from there they launched attacks, suicide bombings, ambushes, kidnappings. Some 40,000 people have been killed so far. Turkey considers the PKK to be a terrorist organization. So does the US and the European Union. Over the years, terror threats from the group have waned, but Turkey doesn't believe that. Today, it launched strikes on Kurdish targets in northern Iraq and Syria. The targets included military and intelligence facilities, ammunition depots, as well as logistical and energy infrastructure. The attack comes at a crucial time. A major trade fair for defense and aerospace industries is underway in Istanbul. The TUSAS is a key player in Turkey's defense industry. It built the country's first indigenous fighter jet, the Khan. Ankara is looking at this as an attack on its crucial defense industry. So it will not rest easy until the threat is completely neutralized.
I know Europe loves a good lecture, whether it's on secularism or free speech or racism, so I've got a candidate for them. A new report, it talks about rising Islamophobia in a few countries. Muslim kids are getting bullied in schools. Muslims cannot find jobs. They can't even rent good homes. It is the perfect candidate for lecturing. Just one problem though. You have to speak to the mirror this time, because all of this is happening in Europe. That's right. This report surveyed nearly 10,000 Muslims in 13 European Union states. And here's what it found. A worrying surge in racism against Muslims and dehumanizing anti-Muslim rhetoric. This was before October last year. So before the Hamas attack on Israel, we've seen Islamophobia only rise after that. So chances are the numbers now will be worse. Nonetheless, let's take a look at them. 47% Muslim respondents reported racism. It is up from 39% in 2016. The numbers differ from country to country. In Austria, it was 71%. In Germany, it was 68%. These are very high numbers in so-called liberal countries. 39% Muslims reported discrimination in the job market. 35% Muslims face difficulties in renting or buying houses, which is up from 22% in 2016. Again, very high numbers. The report says Muslims are more likely to live in poverty, more likely to live in overcrowded housing, and more likely to be on temporary job contracts, meaning no job security. Like I said, these numbers will likely be higher now. Just look at Germany. They logged nearly 2,000 anti-Muslim incidents this year, 2,000. It's a 114% rise from 2023. What is driving this surge of Islamophobia? Well, Europe is more diverse now. The last decade saw an influx of Muslims into the continent. Reports say around 3.5 million of them. As a result, Europe has more Muslims today than ever before. They make up around 5% of the total population, which is around 26 million. And cue the Islamophobia. Europe championed secularism when their society was homogeneous, or mostly Christian. The moment it became diverse, their true face was revealed. They're treating Muslims like second-class citizens, yet no one talks about it. Certainly not the sanctimonious European leaders. They love reminding other countries of secularism. We've seen it many times with India. Just think back to 2020. India had passed a new citizenship law, what we call the CAA, the Citizenship Amendment Act. An entirely domestic matter. But for some reason, the European Parliament waded into it. They said it targeted Indian Muslims. Later that year, we saw another example. This happened after the Delhi riots. Look at what the EU's human rights official said. It is with great concern that I have been observing the rule of law deteriorate in India. She also called for an independent probe. Again, as if it's Europe's call to make. Another example is from 2018. The European Parliament talked about so-called anti-conversion law in India. They said it threatened religious minorities. Some European MPs have gone a step ahead. They've called for sanctions on India. Will these MPs also call for sanctions on Austria, on Germany, or Hungary? Something tells me they won't. Because Europe has created this narrative around them. Any instance of Islamophobia is dubbed as far right or a fringe campaign. But here's what Europe does not tell you. The far right is mainstream now. 7 EU countries are run by far right parties. Does that sound fringe to you? Also, the EU is copying far-right policies in Brussels. Consider the Italian migrant deal. Their government is asking Albania to detain and process migrants heading to Italy, a bit like the UK's Rwanda scheme. A Roman court blocked that deal on Friday. They said migrants cannot be sent to such unsafe countries, but the EU is silently backing it. Some reports say they're considering a similar deal for the entire bloc. So my point is quite simple. This racism and Islamophobia is not fringe. It is very much mainstream in Europe. And it's not recent either. Religious minorities have historically faced racism in Europe, whether it was the Jews in the last century or Muslims in this century. So maybe it's time to stop the lectures, to look inward and fix your own problems. In the United States, it's the home stretch. Candidates are on a campaign blitz. Kamala Harris is touring battleground states, and so is Donald Trump. But as election day draws closer, the attacks are turning nasty. Kamala Harris called Donald Trump unhinged and unstable. Meanwhile, Trump said that she was on drugs. Kamala Harris was on drugs, that's what he said. This trade of barbs is not unusual, but it's getting uglier by the day. Our next report tells you how personal attacks are dominating the US presidential campaign.
Kamala Harris versus Donald Trump. This presidential race will go down to the last wire. The candidates are neck and neck. They are tied in battleground states, and that's where the two candidates are campaigning. There are trips to Delhi's, endorsements by big names, and even the cowboys have joined in. This push in the last leg means just one thing. The election is as close as it gets. It could be anyone's victory at this point. And amid all of this, Donald Trump and Kamala Harris seem to have the same strategy. A flurry of personal attacks.
She interviews, she was so bad. She gave an answer. This never happened to me. Why does it happen? She gave an answer that was so bad that they changed it. They took it out, threw it out. They didn't like edit a little bit, take a word out. No, no, no. They took the entire, it was a long, stupid, she didn't know where the hell she was going. Does she drink? Is she on drugs? I don't know. I don't know. I don't know. I have no idea.
Donald Trump is increasingly unhinged and unstable. And in a second term, people like John Kelly would not be there to be the guardrails against his propensities and his actions. Those who once tried to stop him from pursuing his worst impulses would no longer be there, and no longer be there to rein him in. So the bottom line is this. We know what Donald Trump wants. He wants unchecked power.
Now, none of this is new for Donald Trump. His personal attacks started last year. Then it was against US President Joe Biden. He was default Democratic presidential nominee, and Trump went after him. He questioned his mental health. He cracked jokes about his age. He called him mentally impaired.
Joe Biden became mentally impaired. Kamala was born that way.
That had to stop after Biden stepped down. Trump could no longer question him. So he trained his guns on his successor, Kamala Harris. The Trump campaign has questioned everything from her policies to her laugh.
What happened to her laugh? I haven't heard that laugh in about a week. That's why they keep her off the stage. That's why she's disappeared. That's the laugh of a crazy person, I will tell you, if you haven't known it. It's a crazy. She's crazy.
The barb exchange has now intensified after the recent claims of Trump's former White House Chief of Staff, John Kelly. He said Trump met the definition of a fascist. He claims the former president had once said that Adolf Hitler did some good things. The Democrats are using this as fodder.
All of this is further evidence for the American people of who Donald Trump really is. This is a window into who Donald Trump really is, from the people who know him best, from the people who worked with him side by side in the Oval Office and in the Situation Room.
Economy, immigration, national security, freedom of speech, abortion rights. These are some of the key issues in the 2024 elections. That's what the headlines should be about. Yet, the two candidates are busy getting personal. As the election day draws closer, looks like the presidential race is hitting some new lows.
Now let's turn to Bangladesh, where a siege is currently underway. Thousands of protesters have gathered outside Bangladesh's presidential palace. It is called Bongo Bhavan. It is located in the capital, Dhaka. This is where the country's president lives and works. But for the past 3 days, it has been surrounded. Protesters have gathered to demand the president's resignation. They've been there since Tuesday night, when they attempted to storm the palace. Take a look at this. They did not succeed at the time, and security has been beefed up. But the mob is by no means under control. If anything, they seem to have been emboldened.
Within 2 days, we will pick up a better president after creating a roadmap in consultation with political parties. The army chief is now abroad, and upon his return to the country, we will oust the president within 1 week.
Now, to be clear, that isn't a government official. He's not a politician either. He's a student. But you just saw him dictating government policy. Do you know why? Because this is how it goes in Bangladesh these days. Students voice their demands and the interim government does their bidding. The students have come out with 5 demands. They want the president to resign. They want to repeal Bangladesh's constitution. They want the country to be proclaimed a republic. It already is one, but they want it done again. They want the last 3 elections to be declared invalid, and they wanted the Bangladesh Chhatra League banned. That's the youth wing of the Awami League, that is former Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina's party. The students wanted this group to be banned, and they've already got their wish, the last wish. The Chhatra League was banned yesterday under Bangladesh's Anti-Terrorism Act. The student political wing was accused of committing atrocities in July when protesters were out on the streets, when protests were taking place in Bangladesh. Now that the protesting students have won, their erstwhile rivals from Sheikh Hasina's, affiliated to Sheikh Hasina's party, have been banned. And senior Chhatra League members are being rounded up. To the victor go the spoils, I suppose. The student protesters have won. Sheikh Hasina has fled the country. An interim government is running the show with Nobel laureate Muhammad Yunus in charge. But he isn't the one really governing. The student protesters are part of his government, and they are the ones calling the shots. That is why they can declare that the president will be ousted in a few days. Their gripe with the president stems from an interview. President Mohammad Shahabuddin recently said that he does not have Sheikh Hasina's resignation letter. This infuriated the student protesters. They believe it was a ploy, a sly way to declare Sheikh Hasina the legitimate leader of Bangladesh. So now they want the president to go. And they've surrounded his residence to force him to step down. This would lead to a constitutional crisis in the country. Even the opposition parties do not want it, because it may delay the next election. But the students don't seem to care. Their man is in charge. They are part of the government, and they can get away with anything. They can get anything they want by issuing ultimatums. So why would the student protesters want anything to change? They are running Bangladesh without any checks and balances. It's the recipe for disaster. Today, it's a student group that's been banned. Tomorrow, it will be the president. Who knows what will happen the day after? History has shown that mob rule never ends well. Institutions exist for a reason. Hopefully, Bangladesh realizes that before it's too late. Now on to the war in Ukraine, which is reportedly also being fought by North Korea. For the first time, the United States claims to have evidence of this. They say Pyongyang has sent 3,000 troops to Russia for deployment in Ukraine. The US calls the troops fair game and warns of serious repercussions. This comes after similar claims by South Korea, which has warned of sending weapons to Ukraine. What does this escalation mean for the war? Why does Russia need North Korean troops? And what will Pyongyang get out of this? Here's a report.
North Korean troops seem to have triggered a new front in Ukraine, and for the first time, the US has evidence of it. They say that North Korea has sent 3,000 troops to Russia for training before their possible deployment in Ukraine.
North Korean soldiers are traveling to Russia to fight against Ukraine. We're working closely with our allies and partners to gain a full understanding of this situation, but today I'm prepared to share what we know at this stage. We assess that between early to mid-October, North Korea moved at least 3,000 soldiers into eastern Russia. We assess that these soldiers traveled by ship from the Wonsan area in North Korea to Vladivostok, Russia. These soldiers then traveled onward to multiple Russian military training sites in eastern Russia, where they are currently undergoing training.
The US is not sure whether the soldiers will enter into combat alongside Russia, but they say that there is a high probability.
If they do deploy to fight against Ukraine, they're fair game. They're fair targets, and the Ukrainian military will defend themselves against North Korean soldiers the same way they're defending themselves against Russian soldiers.
This disclosure coincides with similar claims in recent days from Ukraine and South Korea. Seoul says it has evidence that Pyongyang has sent 3,000 troops. They have called it a threat to global security.
I have made it clear that the Republic of Korea will never tolerate this and will take necessary steps with the international community in accordance with the progress of Russia-North Korea military cooperation.
Russian military has been recruiting a lot of North Koreans, and we have confirmed the fact that the Russian military has been educating them about various military equipment, including special training about how to operate unmanned aerial vehicles.
So Seoul is preparing to up the ante. They have called for the immediate withdrawal of North Korea's troops and warned of supplying lethal weapons to Ukraine. Speaking of which, President Volodymyr Zelensky believes that matters are far worse than the US and South Korea believe. Ukraine accuses Pyongyang of sending 10,000 soldiers to Russia. But unsurprisingly, both Moscow and Pyongyang deny all the claims. The two countries signed a mutual defense treaty at a summit in June. They pledged to boost military ties. So what's happening now could simply be an extension of it. And if it is, then it's not a good look for Russia. The Kremlin has reportedly lost hundreds of thousands of soldiers to the war in Ukraine. So could this be an indication of trouble for Putin? If yes, then North Korea may benefit from it. The South worries that Russia will reward Pyongyang with sophisticated weapon technology to boost its nuclear program, which is crucial for leader Kim Jong-un amid the soaring tensions between the two Koreas this year. This is bound to frustrate the United States. They call Kim's participation in the Ukraine war a very, very serious issue, which will impact not just Europe, but also the Indo-Pacific.
For our last story tonight, let's go back to February 28th, when 14-year-old Suel Sedza took out his phone and texted his best friend, Dani. Sedza told Dani that he misses her, and Dani urged him to come home to her. So Sedza put down the phone, took his stepfather's gun and pulled the trigger. He killed himself. Sedza lived in Florida. He was in the 9th grade. And he had been texting Dani constantly for about a year. Some of the chats were romantic or sexual, but often they were sad. Sedza told Dani that he felt empty, exhausted, that he hated himself, and even talked about thoughts of suicide. And somewhere the line between real and artificial blurred because Dani is not human. It is an AI chatbot, a lifelike chatbot, with the persona of the Game of Thrones character, Daenerys Targaryen. Hence the name Dani. The bot belongs to the platform Character AI, which was started by two former Google researchers. Character AI is the market leader in AI companionship, basically in designing super intelligent bots that can hear you, understand you, and remember the things you say. The platform has 20 million users, and now it has been sued, along with its founders and Google. They have been sued by Sedza's mother for her son's death. She alleges wrongful death, negligence, and product liability, like using teens' data to train AI models, using addictive features, steering teens towards sexual conversations, all without proper safeguards. So the AI platform is in hot water. And they have issued a statement saying that they acknowledge the tragic situation and that they take user safety, quote unquote, very seriously. Well, that may be, but they don't seem to be doing a very good job at it. AI, much like social media, is booming, and it is largely unregulated. Thousands of AI apps are designed to simulate relationships. Chatbots are improving by the day. They can remember past conversations, adapt to communication styles, role play as real-life people, even send AI-generated selfies. AI is also embedded in toys, video games, and learning software. Meanwhile, on social media, algorithms are telling the young what to watch, what to read, and who to be friends with. There is a wave of tech-fueled harms. Yet where are the guardrails? They barely exist. The reason is apathy. But governments say it is the lack of research. Policies need concrete surveys and data to back them. When it comes to tech use among children and teens, there isn't enough. Yes, studies show that social media and AI expose the young to hate-based, sexual and depressive content, but so far there is no definite link between social media or AI and suicide or depression. Well, part of this is true. Adolescent mental health issues rarely stem from one single cause. But it's also absurd to miss the link. Between 2007 and 2021, the incidence of youth suicide has risen by 62%. This coincides with the rise of social media and AI. Studies show that when life satisfaction goes down among teens, social media use goes up. Plus, AI-generated child sex abuse images are on the rise. How is this not proof? And if this is not enough, here are some headlines from the past few years. In 2019, a 12-year-old died while attempting a TikTok challenge that required suffocation. A 16-year-old killed herself after an Instagram post said that she should die. In 2022, 20 families filed wrongful death lawsuits against social media giants. In 2023, 60 teenagers, 60, bought drugs via social media. Most of them overdosed and died. Some of them died. Advances in technology have always been disruptive. It always takes years before we get the hang of it. But today's tech with AI and social media is another ballgame altogether. It is moving very fast, and we don't have time. We need guardrails now because at this point, AI is like a big, dangerous experiment, and children are the collateral damage. A locally brewed drink, a safari-style suit, and an island paradise. I know it sounds like the opening shot of a James Bond movie, but sadly it's not. We're talking about another British man with a fake job, the King. Charles is visiting the island nation of Samoa. He will be attending the Commonwealth Summit there. Ahead of that, he took part in a ritual. King Charles was anointed as a Samoan High Chief. I underline the word high because it has two meanings here. During the ceremony, Charles was handed a locally brewed alcohol called kava. He drank it while surrounded by heavily tattooed, bare-chested men. Honestly, you can't make this up. The world is one bad day away from another world war, and King Charles is sipping local brews by the beach. And we are stuck here reporting the news. But credit where it's due. Charles handled the kava like a champ, which can't be said of former Australian Deputy Prime Minister Michael McCormick. He drank a similar local brew in Micronesia, and he ended up in hospital, slept for 14 straight hours. Anyway, here's a snapshot of Charles in Wonderland. And now it's time for Vantage Shots, images that tell the story. Tropical storm Trami batters the Philippines, killing at least 26 people. Young Londoners push for the world's first Afro hair emojis. And Hong Kong discovers a dinosaur fossil for the first time. Finally, taking you back in history, on this day in 1945, the United Nations was established following the end of World War II. It was created to promote international peace, security and cooperation. Back then, 51 founding countries signed the UN Charter. Today, the organization has 193 member states, playing a vital role in addressing global issues, or at least trying to. We're leaving you on that note. Thank you for watching. We'll see you tomorrow.